Every trucker who ran a Mack remembers the same moment. Loaded trailer, mountain grade. The RPM drops to 1,200. Any other diesel would be dead in the water. But you do not touch the gear shift, and the truck keeps pulling. This is the story of the Maxidyne NBT 675. By the mid-1960s, Mack Trucks was bleeding money, and the entire trucking industry was stuck solving the wrong problem. Engines were getting more powerful, but every jump in power meant more gears to manage it. 10 speeds, 13 speeds, 18 in some rigs. The industry's answer was always the same: more gears. Mack's engineers asked a different question. What if an engine could make usable power across such a wide RPM range that half those gears became unnecessary? What came out of Mack's Hagerstown plant in 1966 created loyalty that has not faded in 60 years. In the 1960s, most truck diesels made their best power in a window of about 300 to 400 RPM. Peak torque was at 1,600 RPM or 1,800 RPM. Drop below 1,400 RPM, and you had already lost a third of your pulling power. The fuel system was tuned for one sweet spot. The turbo was sized for one engine speed. Outside that narrow range, everything fell off, including fuel burn, boost, and torque. The standard torque rise was around 15 to 20%. At low RPM, you were working with maybe 80% of what the engine could give you. For a loaded truck on a grade, that meant one thing: the load pulled the RPM down. You had to shift before the engine fell out of its power band. If you did not, you lost speed. Getting it back meant downshifting 2 or 3 more times while the truck slowed to a crawl. The industry's answer was simple: more gears. The Fuller Road Ranger gave drivers 10 ratios. The 13 speed added a splitter to divide gears in half. The 18 speed split them in both ranges. Mechanical marvels, but they put the entire burden of engine management on the driver. Now put yourself in that cab. You are hauling 70,000 pounds up a 6% grade. It is 1970. You approach an 8th gear at 50 miles per hour. The tachometer starts falling. 1,800, then 1,700. You feel it lugging. Clutch in. Flip the splitter. Clutch out. 8th high. The engine picks back up to 1,600, but the grade keeps pulling. 1,500, 1,400. You are losing speed. Clutch in. Shift to 7th. The engine speed comes back to 1,700, but you are down to 40 miles per hour now. The grade does not care. 1,600, 1,500. Shift to 6th, then 5th. By the top, you have made 8 shifts. Your concentration never broke, because it could not. One missed shift, and you would have lost even more speed, more fuel, more time. That was every grade, every day, every load. And at every stoplight in town, you rode through 6 or 7 gears just to reach the speed limit. The entire industry accepted this as the cost of hauling freight. The narrow power band was physics. The transmission existed to compensate for it. Nobody questioned whether the engine itself could be built differently. Mack questioned it. The conventional wisdom said you needed more gears to match the narrow power band. Mack decided to widen the power band instead. Most diesels made peak torque at 1 engine speed. Drop below that speed, and torque fell off fast. The industry standard torque rise was 15 to 20%. The Maxidyne had 52%. That meant as the engine lugged down under load, the torque did not fall off. It climbed. At 1,200 RPM, the Maxidyne was making more pulling force than it was at rated speed. The usable power band stretched from 1,200 to 2,100 RPM. That is 900 RPM of working range, double what the competition offered. Getting that curve required rethinking the entire engine. The fuel injection system could not be tuned for one sweet spot anymore. It had to adjust timing and fuel delivery across the full operating range and maintain clean combustion at every point. The turbocharger could not be sized for peak RPM. It had to deliver consistent boost from 1,200 RPM all the way up. The piston crown geometry, the combustion chamber shape, and the cylinder head layout all had to support efficient burn across varying speeds and loads. None of that was simple, but all of it was invisible to the driver. The original NBT 675 made 237 horsepower and 906 pound-feet of torque at rated speed. Lug it down to 1,200 RPM, and the torque rose well past that. Later versions pushed further. The intercooled NBT 676 made 285 horsepower and 1,080 pound-feet. The 300 Maxidyne topped 1,400 pound-feet, but the peak numbers were not the point. The shape of the torque curve was, and that curve changed what transmission the engine needed behind it. Instead of a 10-speed or 13-speed Fuller, Mack used a 5-speed. The triplex maxi torque. Triple countershafts. Virtually indestructible. Scrapyards were full of them because nobody ever broke one. 5 gears. That was it. With the Maxidyne's power band, each gear covered 3 to 4 times the speed range of a conventional setup. 5th gear, with a 4.17 rear axle, could run from 36 to 63 miles per hour. No shifting. A conventional truck needed 2 or 3 gear changes to cover that same range. And the Maxidyne had a party trick. You could start a fully loaded truck, 80,000 pounds, from a dead stop in 4th gear. Sometimes 5th, top gear. Just ease out the clutch and let the torque rise do the work. Drivers would demonstrate this at truck stops, just to watch the faces of guys running Cummins and Cat. Now put yourself back on that 6% grade. Same hill, same 70,000 pound load. But you are in a Mack R model with an NBT 675 and a triplex maxi torque. 4th gear, 50 miles per hour. The grade hits. The tachometer starts falling. 1,800, then 1,700. You do not touch the shifter. 1,600. The engine note deepens, but it is not struggling. 1,500, 1,400, 1,300, 1,200 RPM. Any other diesel would be choking. The Maxidyne is making more torque now than it was at 1,800. You hold 35 miles per hour to the top. Your right hand never left the wheel. 0 shifts. What Mack had done was transfer the complexity from the transmission to the engine. Instead of forcing you to shift constantly to keep the engine in its power band, they built an engine with a power band wide enough that shifting became optional. The first time you climbed into a Maxidyne truck, something felt wrong. The gear ratios felt too wide. The engine was lugging. Every instinct from years of driving told you to downshift, but the gear you wanted wasn't there. A 5-speed shifter doesn't have a 7th gear. Panic would set in for a second. Then the engine would prove it didn't need that gear. It would hold the load at 1,200 RPM and keep moving. By the end of the first week, most drivers had adjusted. By the end of the first month, many refused to drive anything else. The sound was part of it. A conventional diesel underload had a rhythm, RPM climbing, a shift, RPM dropping, climbing again. Constant change. The Maxidyne didn't do that. Under load, it settled into a low, steady rumble that didn't change no matter how long the grade lasted. Drivers described it as a sound you could trust. But the real difference was what it took out of your day. Shifting a 13-speed through a mountain pass required constant attention. Every grade was a sequence. Clutch, shifter, splitter, clutch, shifter for hours. The Maxidyne got rid of most of that. You could focus on the road, on traffic, on conditions ahead. The mental load dropped. The physical effort dropped. And at every stoplight in town, you weren't rowing through 8 gears. Start in 3rd or 4th. Shift to 5th. Done. Fleet operators saw the effects immediately. Training time for new drivers was cut. The constant gear decisions that took months to master were simply gone. Clutch life improved because fewer shifts meant less wear. And the triplex max torque behind it was virtually indestructible. Scrapyards were full of them, not because they broke, but because trucks wore out around them. The loyalty was something nobody expected. Drivers who had been given Maxidyne Max would ask to stay in those trucks. When fleets rotated equipment, Maxidyne drivers fought to keep theirs. One fleet operator in the Pacific Northwest announced he was switching brands over the next year. 3 of his most experienced drivers gave notice within a month. They found jobs with fleets that ran Max. They weren't leaving over pay. They were leaving because they refused to go back to shifting 13 gears through the Cascades. That loyalty wasn't nostalgia. It was based on the daily physical experience of doing the job. The Maxidyne removed a specific source of exhaustion without taking away your connection to the truck. You could still hear the engine, feel it through the throttle and the frame. It didn't replace your skill. It just stopped wasting it on gear changes. But the Maxidyne didn't just change how drivers felt. It came with real trade-offs that Max competitors were quick to point out. The Maxidyne was never going to take over all of trucking. Mack knew it. The wide torque band solved the problem of heavy loads on steep grades, but it created limits everywhere else. Top speed was 1. A 5-speed transmission with wide gear spacing couldn't match a 13-speed for top-end flexibility. Once you hit 5th gear, that was it. A conventional truck could keep splitting gears and squeezing out a few more miles per hour. For long-haul interstate work where every mile per hour affected profit, that gap mattered. Fuel economy at highway cruise was another. The original Maxidyne revved to 2,100 RPM. At sustained cruise, that burned fuel. Mack later offered the Econodyne, tuned for 1,800 RPM cruise, with better economy. But that narrowed the power band, which compromised the very thing that made the engine special. And then there were the spec sheets. A Maxidyne, rated at 237 horsepower, sat next to a Cummins NTC at 350. A Detroit diesel 8V92 at 400. The Maxidyne's advantage, usable torque across 900 RPM, didn't show up in a number you could compare on paper. What showed up was a lower peak figure. For fleet buyers chasing horsepower, the Maxidyne looked underpowered. By the 1980s, the horsepower war made this work. Fleets wanted 400, 450, 500 horsepower. The Maxidyne topped out around 300. And the engineering precision that made the flat torque curve possible, tighter tolerances, precise turbo matching, and sophisticated fuel calibration, cost more to build than a conventional diesel tuned for 1 peak RPM. That black smoke underload? Unburned fuel. It looked powerful. It sounded powerful. But it wasn't going to survive the emission standards coming in the 1990s. The Maxidyne dominated where it was built to dominate. Construction fleets hauling equipment over mountain roads, logging operations in the Pacific Northwest and Appalachians, heavy haul operators moving oversized loads, regional freight with serious elevation changes. In that work, a Maxidyne Mack outworked anything running a conventional engine, and every driver in those jobs knew it. But mainstream long-haul freight was moving away from the conditions that made the Maxidyne essential. Highways were flatter, load regulations were tighter, speed mattered more than low-end pulling force. And a Fuller Road Ranger worked with every engine, in every truck, on every route. Parts were available in every shop in the country. Put both trucks on a mountain grade, pulling 80,000 pounds, and the Mack stays in 1 gear while the Cummins driver shifts 8 times. Put them on a flat interstate at 65 miles per hour, and the Cummins driver has more speed, more gears to dial in economy, and a cheaper engine to maintain. Mack had built the best engine for a specific world. The problem was that world was getting smaller. The mechanical solution that made the Maxidyne possible eventually became obsolete, not because it stopped working. Electronics could do the same thing while also meeting emission standards the mechanical system never could. By the late 1980s, electronic fuel injection let any diesel engine reshape its torque curve through software. The flat power band that took Mack's engineers years of mechanical development to achieve could now be programmed into a fuel map. Variable geometry turbochargers delivered consistent boost across a wide range of revolutions per minute, without the careful matching Mack had perfected by hand. Automated transmissions eliminated the shifting problem entirely. No driver input was needed at all. The Maxidyne's two greatest advantages, the wide torque band and the simplified transmission, could now be replicated electronically in any engine from any manufacturer. Then emissions regulations closed the door. The Clean Air Act changes, starting in 1990, demanded precise combustion control that mechanical fuel injection could not deliver. Electronic systems could adjust timing to the microsecond, manage exhaust gas recirculation, and work with particulate filters. Redesigning the mechanical Maxidyne to meet those standards would have cost more than replacing it. The last mechanical Maxidyne engines came off the line in the late 1990s. Mack kept the name on electronically controlled engines that delivered similar torque curves through software. The philosophy survived. The hardware did not. By every measurable standard, modern trucks are better. More power, lower emissions, better fuel economy, longer service intervals. But ask a driver who ran both eras, and you'll hear the same thing every time. In a Maxidyne Mack, you felt the engine through the throttle pedal. The response was instant and unfiltered. You knew exactly how much load it was carrying, how hard it was working, when it was reaching its limit. The connection between your right foot and that diesel was direct. In a modern truck, a computer sits between you and the engine. The throttle is a sensor. The response is programmed. It's smoother, more efficient, and objectively better in every way. But you can't feel the engine anymore. The NBT 675 Maxidyne is gone from the highways now. But every modern diesel that makes usable torque across a wide, revolutions per minute range, instead of chasing one peak number, is running on the same idea Mack proved in 1966. The industry spent 50 years saying you needed more gears. Mack said you needed a smarter engine. It took the rest of the industry 30 years and a revolution in electronics to arrive at the same answer. And for the drivers who felt that engine pull a loaded trailer up a mountain grade without a single shift, nothing that came after ever felt the same. For 2 decades, Mack built an engine that did not chase the biggest numbers on a spec sheet. It chased the widest torque curve. And that decision created a loyalty the rest of the industry never figured out how to buy. Many NBT 675s are still running today. 60 years old, still pulling. The Maxidyne proved something simple. Engineering for the driver, not the brochure, creates loyalty that outlasts the truck. And if you ask an old Mack driver today what he'd rather be running, the answer has not changed in 60 years. Nothing but a Maxidyne. If you ran one, I want to hear about it. What routes did you run, and what loads did you carry? Drop your Maxidyne stories in the comments.